Alright everybody, welcome back. Today I've decided that I want to share my story, my experience with Kratom, and eventually Kratom extracts and 7-0H, and tell the story about how that substance almost completely ruined my life and how I've gotten off of it for good. I've been off of Kratom and all Kratom derivative products for over a year now. I think my last dose was in February of 2025. So it's been over a year. I feel like that part of my life is completely behind me. I have no desire to ever go through that again, to ever use again. But I do feel like I learned a lot, and I went through withdrawals multiple times, multiple different ways. So I feel like I might have some helpful tips and tricks on how to get off of it if that's you, and also just share my experience with how I got into it, because that might be helpful. If you don't know what Kratom is, you might be living under a rock. Kratom is everywhere these days. You can't go to almost any gas station without seeing it advertised. You'll see it in its powdered form. You'll see extracts, which are like these little bottles of, I don't know if they're alcohol based, just to extract the compounds, or you'll see these little tabs marketed as 7-0H. Tabs are these little pills that you take. Yeah, it's everywhere. It's completely blown up. I don't know anybody who doesn't at least know what it is, and unfortunately it got my hooks. It got its hooks into me pretty darn bad, and really sent my whole life for a loop for about 3 or 4 years. I want to say it was probably in my life for about 4 years. I wasn't using for 4 years straight. I think I had a few stints where I would take several months off, and then something would happen, and before I knew it, I was right back in the thick of it, or worse off than I was to begin with. So the very first time I ever tried Kratom, I want to say it was almost 10 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. I was in Texas or somewhere in the Southwest, and I was about to take a long road trip with a guy, and I remember hearing about Kratom, maybe seeing it somewhere, and just thinking like, oh, this could be, something to help us endure the multiple day drive that we were about to take. I was really just looking for something that would make the trip a little bit more enjoyable. At that time I was not a drug addict, but was pretty much willing to try anything, and had tried a lot of things at that point. And so I can't remember where we got it. It was probably at like a head shop or something, but we got a small bottle of Kratom, powdered Kratom leaf capsules. And I remember not really knowing about it or what it really was supposed to do, and him and I took some, and we didn't really get any positive feelings from it. We both just kind of felt like this weird tension in our eyes and maybe a little bit of dizziness, and I did not like it at all. I thought that it was completely pointless and garbage, basically. So I think we did it one time, took like 5 grams each, which is definitely enough to, a full dose. And it basically it made us feel like shit, so we threw it out, and I didn't think about Kratom again until many years later. So I think I was around 21 or 22 at that point. I'm 31 now. So I never really thought about Kratom again. I don't have much experience with opioids in general. I've done tramadol once, and I didn't really like that either. It just made me super itchy all over. So not like a big opiate guy. So I didn't really get it at that point. And if you know anything about drugs, a lot of times with some compounds, on your first time that you do them, you don't really get it. Like, it doesn't click for you. Sometimes the negative effects will be more pronounced, and like the positive effects, you haven't really learned to feel them yet, or what they feel like. And sometimes you have to do these compounds 2 or 3 or 4 times before you really get it, and then you're like, oh, like, you learn, your brain kind of learns to fixate on the positive feelings, the pleasure or peace or calm that the drug is giving you, and then your brain looks for that when you're taking it, and the drug almost becomes more powerful, and that once you like are familiar, you become acquainted with its effects. So I had a horrible first experience. But then what ended up happening, maybe 5 or 6 years later, I was working with a guy who now is one of my best friends. We were working on a farm together and doing a lot of physical labor. And him and I were working together, kind of slaving away, doing backbreaking work every day. And I noticed, after being with him for a while, that he often had a jar of this, green stuff in a mason jar with water. It kind of looked like matcha green tea or something like that, and I didn't know what it was. I only had ever done it that one time, and I just didn't put the pieces together. But he always had it on him, and so eventually I asked him about it, and he told me it was Kratom. And I just knew about that past experience I had several years before, and was like, kind of whatever. But being the curious experimental person that I am, of course I inquired with him about it, asked him what his experience with it was, why he liked doing it, and all these things. And he made it pretty clear that it made it a lot easier for him to do the physical labor and basically power through the tasks that we were doing, and gave him more energy, helped him not hurt as much. It was kind of described to me as it having sort of opiate-like effects, but to people a lot of people hear that and they think that that's going to make you nod out or make you like sleepy and lazy. But a lot of people actually are able to be energized by these opiate compounds, and maybe it's because they're kind of numbed from the pain and exhaustion in their body and they're able to push through it. But a lot of people are actually much more energetic when they're on these things, and that's how he described Kratom to me. It was like, oh, it makes your body not hurt, but it also makes you able to power through the labor that we were doing. And so I immediately was like, oh, sweet, like I'm sold, let me try it. And so he warned me and was like, hey man, I just want you to know that like I'm addicted to this stuff, and you need to be really careful with it, because if you start doing it every day, you're going to become physically dependent on it. And I basically didn't listen to that at all. I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try it once and see what it's all about, because this guy, I assumed, oh man, he's drinking this stuff all the time, so he must really like it. So I remember, he had a big thing of it and I chugged a bunch of it, and I don't remember it being like this profound experience at all, but I do think it helped. I felt like it made work a little bit easier. It was just as simple as that, as like the labor that we were doing just felt a little bit easier. And if you've done a lot of labor, if something's going to make the labor seem easier or more fun or whatever, then that's a pretty tempting thing to indulge in, because doing labor all day every day can get pretty old and exhausting. And yeah, so it's kind of like how people rely on caffeine to get through the day. I didn't really see it as any different than that. So he had big bags of the powdered leaf extract, and he let me have some. And I think for a while I was just doing it like every third day or every other day, and not a lot, just like 1 cup of it in the middle of the workday. So I didn't really think anything of it. I remember thinking that it was nasty. It tastes disgusting. If you've ever just mixed the powder into water and drank it, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty foul. So, you know, I crossed that line to where now I'm like, oh, okay, you know, Kratom is okay. And started to enjoy it, become familiar with its effects. It definitely made me more energized. It made me not really care, so I was like having more fun, goofier, like more lighthearted. Definitely got me in like a different headspace to where I was kind of felt intoxicated in what I thought was an enjoyable way. And the next thing I realized was I was also drinking pretty heavily at this time, and I want to say most nights I was drinking, and more often than not I was like getting drunk, like having 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 drinks in a given night. And I noticed pretty quickly that if I had Kratom first thing in the morning, I could like knock out any sensation of a hangover. And this is what really kind of took my Kratom experience to another level, because I basically learned that I could drink at night and then in the morning have Kratom and then caffeine, and then in the afternoon a little bit more Kratom, and then the evening would come around and I'd be so jacked up on everything, and then I would need alcohol to come down. And I basically got to this point where 24/7 I was either drinking caffeine or Kratom or coffee. Like I was always like getting amped up on one of these things. Alcohol also gives me a lot of energy. So I kind of was like turned up 24/7, which, you know, at the time I thought everything was fine, but deep down I was suffering greatly. This was definitely one of the darkest times of my life. So I don't really know. It's kind of foggy with how long I engaged in that behavior, like consecutively. But the real wake-up call for me was I started to wake up in the middle of the night. You know, I'd fall asleep at like 10 and I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would feel like shit, like just achy all over, and like I had to like kind of move around in my body, just super uncomfortable. And I was like, man, what the fuck is this about? And then it dawned on me that I was going into withdrawals. And it wasn't like I didn't have Kratom the day before. Like I would basically be drinking Kratom until I went to bed. Oh, you scared the fuck out of me, dog. Basically drinking Kratom until I went to bed. And then so I quickly learned that I had to keep some Kratom by my bed at night for when I would wake up, and then I would chug, you know, half of a pint or something, just enough to take the withdrawals away, and then I'd be able to go back asleep. But I remember thinking at that time that I had really fucked up, because I did not have any experience being addicted to an opiate before, and I did not understand the power of opiate withdrawal. And it got to the point where I had to be ingesting some amount of Kratom every 6 hours or so, or I would start to go into withdrawals. I would get a runny nose and congestion, my eyes would water, I would feel achy, irritable, and then before I knew it, I was like kind of bugging out, like just really uncomfortable. But around that time, you know, I just absolutely made sure that I always had Kratom. We were buying it online by the kilo, uh, like several hundred or uh, several bags, kilo bags, that would last a month. And I want to say at the peak of it, I was drinking, you know, maybe 20 to 30 grams ish a day. My friend was drinking a lot more, but he was a much bigger guy. I've always been kind of sensitive or not really need a whole lot of any given substance to feel it. So I think I peaked out probably at around 30 grams a day, which was, if I was doing that, that was a pretty heavy day. So I remember I basically had a full-blown breakdown after doing that for a while. I remember there being one night where I woke up in the middle of the night in withdrawals and going to drink the sludge, as they call it, and just absolutely hating the Kratom with every fiber of my being. I just hated that I had become a slave to this substance. I hated how it tasted. I hated how it was making me feel. It had completely taken over my life. And also, of course, the drinking and caffeine, in my opinion. I still drink caffeine now, but I was definitely abusing it. I just had become an absolute slave. These compounds had taken over me completely. And so I remember having kind of a mental breakdown because of it, and almost like a come to Jesus moment, crying, telling my boss what was going on. It was a huge mess. It was super embarrassing. But I decided, oh, I'm gonna go cold turkey off of this stuff, which never having gone through opiate withdrawal at the time, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I think I actually had that to my benefit at the time. You know, later times that I went through it, knowing the hell that I was going to experience, it made it much more difficult to go into it. But I remember that first time, I don't think I slept for like 3 days. It'd be the middle of the night, and my wife and my baby son at that time, they were in the house. And so I would go out on the porch, bring a mattress out on the porch, and just flop around like a fish out of water, because my body felt so weird and I was bugging out so bad. I remember it took me for like a week. I think I stopped drinking. I'm pretty sure I stopped drinking at this time too. I just was gonna get completely clean. I had been sober before, so wasn't like my first stint with sobriety. But I remember it took me like at least a full week to even feel a little bit normal. Like I was trying to continue to go to work, and I just felt like my body weighed 1,000,000 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. I was definitely like depressed. I just felt like absolute shit for like a week straight. But eventually, you know, that did kind of go away, and I started to feel more normal. And, you know, I can't really remember how long I was sober for after that. I know it was at least a few months. And then somewhere around that time we moved just down the road. But ultimately I had a series of relapses. But I knew at that point that I had to get sober, if not for myself, then for my wife and son, and then eventually daughter. And I just knew that I was fucking up bad, but I did not know at all what to do. So for the next couple years, it seemed like I was able to get sober, stay sober for a couple months, 2 or 3 months, and then eventually something would come up and I would get a super overwhelmed feeling, and I would go out and justify drinking, and then I would get hungover, and then I would start taking Kratom again, or one way or another something would come into my life and I wouldn't be able to resist the urge, and I would be able to rationalize using to myself one way or another. And it seemed like I would relapse, and then it would get super intense again. I would go all in, and then eventually I would come to a breaking point. But the period in between relapsing and the breaking point window was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But somewhere along the way, I tried Kratom extract, which just made total sense to me. I think I had completely gotten over the desire to want to drink Kratom powder. You have to drink so much of it, and it tastes so bad that it's just really like not very enjoyable. I guess for a while I did it because I felt like I had to not go through withdrawals, but I really grew to hate this stuff. So when the extracts came out, or I started to know about them, and the idea of being able to get the effects of 10 grams of Kratom in like one little shot, or 20 grams of Kratom in one little shot, and just have to take one nasty ass sip instead of like 50, that was super appealing to me. Just made the whole process much more efficient. But these extracts, you know, they're like $20-$30 for, you know, they're supposed to be 2 doses in one, but of course I would just take the whole thing, and that's a lot of money, you know, because if you end up doing 1 or 2 of those a day, that's a $25-$50 habit a day. That adds up quick. So I remember, and the other thing about that is I was around this time I started to relapse without my family knowing. In the beginning, they knew about my Kratom use. They didn't really know the problems that it was going to cause for me, just like I didn't know, so I didn't really have a reason to hide it. And but for a while there, like, I was ashamed of the fact that I was doing it, and so these little extracts were pretty nifty. You know, I could get loaded real fast and then just throw them out. The only problem is that they're ridiculously expensive. So that became a pretty big problem. And the thing about the extracts is it's just so efficient, and it hits you so hard because you're like getting this huge dose all at once. I think that it's also much more addictive, you know, naturally, like, because you just go from 0 to way up here way faster, and that's just a much more intense experience physiologically. And so I think it's inherently more addictive. And then next thing I knew, I look behind the glass counter, and there's these 7-OH tablets, and it's this little package like this, and it's got six pills in it. And it was like the price of one of those extract bottles. And I started looking at how much of the stuff was supposedly in the pills compared to the extracts, and, you know, economically it just made way more sense. So I immediately switched to these 7-OH tablets, and man, these things they're really a whole different level of reality and addiction. They hit super hard, they wear off super fast, and then before you know it, you're withdrawing really, really hard. And I felt like they were psychologically more addictive too, and almost produced like more psychedelic effects. In what I mean by that is kind of just like closed-eyed visuals. And the 7-OH tablets, like, I would nod off on them and go into like this dream like world. And I remember, like, I would take a bunch before bed and like not even sleep at night, but I would be just laying in bed, like surfing through this other reality while just like laying unconscious dead. Like I said, I've never done like, you know, oxys or fentanyl or anything like that, so I don't really know how similar it is to those experiences, but I can't imagine that it's that far off. because I would be nodded out for 4 hours reliably, and if I took enough, and I mean, just having these crazy experiences. I even had an experience one time where I was nodded out on this stuff, and I just saw like a demonic figure with my eyes closed, this demonic figure with this gnashing of teeth and blood and gore. And it really, like, I was like, holy shit, this stuff is demonic. Like, I've done a lot of psychedelics. I've had a lot of closed-eyed visuals. I've, had a lot of these sort of out-of-body experiences, and nothing has ever come close to how dark and demonic what I saw while I was nodded out was. A lot of times I would just be sort of like in this fantasy world, not really, I don't even know doing what, but obviously it feels good, whatever that means, but it's obviously just like a huge waste of time and money. And it's not really like, it's not getting you anywhere. So just because something feels good, if it's not moving your life forward, it's just not good. It doesn't matter how it feels. So then basically my experience morphed into being fully addicted to these 7-OH tablets. I was having to sneak off to the gas station once a day, twice a day, spending, $50 a day minimum. And then that quickly becomes $50 a day minimum, not to get high, but just to not go through withdrawals. I got to the point where I was rationing. Get, Silas, get. Where I was rationing out these 6 pills, breaking them in half, and just like having them on me, making sure that I had a half a dose every few hours, just so I wouldn't get start getting super sick and uncomfortable, just to be able to function. And you get so good and used to this that it's like, it's weird. It becomes second nature, and it's like your whole reality starts to revolve on managing your intake of these substances to just avoid going through withdrawals, because if you've gone through it, that it's just like the most unpleasant, torturous, hellish experience that a human being, might be able to experience. It's seriously physically and psychologically torturous. So yeah, how I got to the point where I just, off this 7-OH stuff, I could not bring myself to go cold turkey. It just scared me too bad. It was just so much worse than the powdered stuff. So there were a couple different times that I tapered down and got off and would end up relapsing. But what finally worked for me was it took me, the last time I got off, I think it took me 4 months to taper down from 2 of these pills down to nothing. So I can't remember exactly what my strategy was, but I can try to relate it to you. I want to say when I started, I needed 2 pills, 2 pills a day to not go into withdrawals. And so what I ended up doing was just stabilizing on that. Okay, I'm just gonna have my 2, ration them out throughout the day, and try to get my body used to that amount of kratom or 7-OH. And after a couple weeks of that, then I would cut it down to 1.5, and then I cut it down to 1. And I think I started quartering them at that point. I would take a quarter in the morning, a quarter at lunch, a quarter in the evening, and then a quarter before bed. And then from that, it's kind of hard to go any lower than that, because I found there's just not enough ways to break it up, so you just start going into withdrawals. So what I recommend is, if you get to where you're down to 1 tab a day, you just switch over to the powder, and in the beginning, because whatever's in these pills, it's not exactly what they say it is, and the 7-OH compound is not even, it's in the kratom, but it's in trace amounts. And so nobody even really knows like how they're getting it, if they're synthesizing this stuff and putting it in there. And there's been a lot of lab tests where they show that there's other shit in there too that people don't even really know what it is. So my point is that it's not really like this one-to-one thing where you can get off of the 7-OH tablets and get on to powdered kratom, and it'll just like get rid of all your withdrawal symptoms, because it's not exactly the same compound, and those 7-OH tablets are so much stronger and have so much more psychological effects that you're still going to go through some amount of withdrawal. But what I did was in that first week, drink as much kratom leaf powder as you need to survive. And then after about a week, you'll get an idea of sort of where you're at. But you should be able to get through the 7-OH withdrawals with the kratom powder. So, and this whole time, your goal has to be to get off of this stuff, or you're not going to do it. So that's really up to you. You have to decide when, okay, this stuff is completely ruining my life, like there has to be another way. You have to get yourself there. I can't really do that for you. So once you get yourself fully over to the kratom leaf powder and you get stabilized at a certain dosage, say I'm like, okay, I need 15 grams a day just to feel normal. I'm not trying to get high. I'm just trying to feel normal. You do that, and then I think every week I drop down a half a gram. And what I highly recommend doing, is switching over to the kratom leaf capsules, because they're pre-measured for you. And so a lot of them are like 0.3 grams, or you can get ones that are 0.5 grams. But then this way, for sure how much you're taking, and you don't have to like get a scale and measure it out every time, because that's just a bitch. And especially when you get down into the lesser amounts, that would just be a pain in the ass. And so what I did was I broke up my daily allowance into 4 doses: morning, lunch, afternoon, and before bed. And usually what I would do, and then the next week, would be a little bit less. And I would usually take from the nighttime dose, I think, just because, you're not really awake for that. So if you do like start to go in the faintest amount of withdrawals, which you really won't from just a half a gram drop, especially, and then you have a week to stabilize and then another half a gram. If you take that half gram away from your evening dose, you shouldn't really notice that. And then you'll go down another half a gram, and then you'll eventually be taking a little bit less from each of your 4 doses. But that worked for me. I didn't really ever feel a significant amount of withdrawal. And by the time that I was down to like 2 grams a day, I really feel like, oh, I could get off of this stuff, no problem. But I was also scared. I was also tired of taking it, because I just kind of felt like a little bitch. But I wanted to like stick through with my plan. And eventually I got down to my last half a gram dose, taking a half a gram a day, just once a day. Or I think I was like taking a 1/4 gram in the morning and then a 1/4 gram at night, which is, like one little tiny capsule. And I remember the last time I did it and just being so thankful that I didn't have to deal with this stuff anymore. And at that point, I was taking such a small amount that I couldn't really feel it anyway. So then when I stopped, I didn't notice anything. And that's how I stopped. And I think because it took me so long to taper off, I had mentally really worked for it, and it had been long enough that I just really decided, like, I'm gonna do this. And if I was going to relapse, like, I would have relapsed during that taper process. But I just was so fed up with being dependent on this stuff and how it made me feel and how it was affecting my relationships. Like, I almost lost my marriage. I spent so much money on those 7-OH tablets. It isolated me. It made me like weirdly overly emotional. Like, I would like blow up and cry, and it just made me like distant from my kids. And like, I even remember my son telling me, he was probably like 3 or 4 at the time, and I remember him saying to me, like, "Daddy, like, you don't play with me while you're on Kratom." And I was like, damn, that's fucked up, you know? That was definitely a wake-up call, because he was right. Because I would get high on Kratom, and then I would just kind of like go hang out or play video games, and just kind of like numb out from my surroundings. And it just made me content with like being alone in myself, which I think is really like what I wanted it to do. Like, I wanted to be away from the world and just like exist inside of myself and like be numb to everything else. But like, that quickly became hell. um, I've really learned that that's not why I'm here to live this life. I'm not here to ignore everybody else and only engage in this like self-serving pleasure, because it's like, that's death. Like, that produces nothing, that goes nowhere. It's just like this inward spiral in myself of isolation and pain. Ironically, it just produces so much pain, because that's the one thing you're running from. Whereas I've learned now that to really get off of this stuff for good, I've learned I had to reframe my relationship with pain. And now I see pain as an ally, not as something to run from, but something to learn from. And I've learned that my pain is there actually to guide me through life. And it's not a bad thing to experience, as long as you pay attention to it. Because if you try to ignore it, it's coming for you. Like, you're never gonna escape the pain that you need to feel. But once you do feel the pain that you need to feel, you can transcend it once you fully face it and accept it. I've learned that what pain really wants from you is for you to accept it. And the moment that you acknowledge it and accept it, it's able to move through you, and it begins to dissipate within reason. I know obviously some people are in chronic physical pain. I feel like that's a little bit of a different thing, but I'm talking more about like an existential pain. Yeah, so I know that was a long one. I'll probably go into this some more different time. If any of you have any questions or would like me to elaborate with anything. But man, this stuff, I thought I was trapped forever. I really did. Until I made a plan and stuck with it, and just prayed that God would get me through to the other side. And now here I am, a year and a half off. I don't ever think about the stuff. Doesn't interest me at all. And like I said, it took me at least 4 months that last time to taper off of it. I'm just so grateful to not have to ever deal with that shit again. It's really like, that stuff is diabolical. It'll ruin your life. So if you're somebody who's struggling with kratom or kratom addiction and you want to chat with me about it, I'm happy to do that. Help you devise a plan to get off. Yeah, and you really deserve that for yourself. You deserve a better life. You deserve to live a life where you're not in the shackles of these compounds that are just like ordering you around like a slave. Yeah, so that's it for this one. I'll check in with y'all later.